Hello and welcome to Beginners Python and Machine Learning Meetup number 87. My name's Tim Cummings. Today we're going to be looking at how to write Python macros using LibreOffice. So LibreOffice is a free open source alternative to Microsoft Office, and it gives you the option of programming languages. It doesn't do the Visual Basic that Excel does, but it does allow you, it has its own version of BASIC, and it can do Python and a couple of other languages. So if you want to follow along today, you'll need to install LibreOffice, and you can get that from LibreOffice.org, and I'll be using LibreOffice 7.0.3, but you'll probably find that most versions, version 6 of LibreOffice will work, probably even version 5. I'll be listening on YouTube chat and also on the Slack channel in the Learning to Code channel. So if you've got any questions, feel free to ask. This is supposed to be a beginner's session, so any questions are fair game, and hopefully you can follow along and get this working on your computer. Now I've prepared a couple of files here. One's got all the Python source code that we're going to be using, and that's available in the GitHub repository. And I've also got a sample LibreOffice Calc spreadsheet that's designed to work with that Python file. So if you download both of those, you won't have to type anything really. They'll work just out of the box. But I'll try to do it by typing in the stuff where possible, and just copying and pasting where there's lots of stuff to type. I'll also be using Visual Studio Code today. You'll notice this is the first time I've presented using Windows, and I'll also be first time I present using Visual Studio Code, so why not try lots of new things in the one day. I hope you can hear me okay. Let me know if everything's fine. So this is the repository, session summaries, where you can download those files from. You could just go straight to those links, but if you're wanting to navigate, the ones we're doing at the moment are in the online folder. Because of COVID, we're doing everything online. And here are the two files. So we're going to select the spreadsheet, and we can click the download link to get that one. And we'll select the Python file. So if you go to raw, that lets you save the file as it is. Okay, Peter's saying I'm quieter. Let's just have a look at that. Okay, I'll just turn the volume up a little bit. So I'm going to save this Python file. I can go save page as, and that'll save it as a Python file, and I can leave it in, I'll put it in downloads. Okay, so this is the list of tasks we're going to go through. So install LibreOffice. I'll make this a bit bigger. I'll install LibreOffice from this URL. LibreOffice comes with Python 3.7.7, so you shouldn't need anything else installed. If you're installing it on Linux, you may need to install the LibreOffice script provider Python as well. But if you're doing Windows or Mac, that comes with Python with it. Okay, now when you're writing these macros, you can put them in the file, the spreadsheet file or the document file that you're building. That's a little bit tricky because they have to be zipped into place in the right place, and the metadata has to be correct. But we can also just put it in a folder, and anything in that folder is accessible by any of the LibreOffice document that's open. So where you put it in Windows, it's in %appdata, %LibreOffice 4 user scripts Python, and on the Mac it's in library application support in your home directory. That tilde means home directory, application support LibreOffice 4 user scripts Python, and in Linux this is the directory you want. So to see where appdata is, you can just run the command prompt and type echo %appdata %, and that tells me it's in users Python, that's my username, appdata roaming. Okay, so that tells me what the path is to that. So let's put these files in the right place. I've got, this is users Python appdata roaming LibreOffice 4 user scripts Python. So you may find as you navigate down there, appdata, you'll have a roaming and LibreOffice 4 user, but you may not have a scripts directory, so you'll have to just create a new folder called scripts and a folder within there called Python. Okay, so these are the files we downloaded. So the Python file will put into there, and what I'm going to and the spreadsheet document, I'll just throw that into documents. Okay, I'll try to do things from scratch so that you can see what it looks like as I build it. So I've opened up Visual Studio Code, and you go here and you say open folder, and you choose that Python folder that you want to open, and it's got your scripts in it. And there you should be able to see the script that that you've downloaded. So I'm going to create a new one. I'll just call it Meetup 087 without the rest of it. And so it's got nothing in. So I'll be building into this one, but you can feel free to everything's set up in the LibreOffice spreadsheet that you've downloaded to talk to this one, Meetup 087 Tim LibreOffice. Now, when you're starting LibreOffice, you can start it as you normally would from the Start menu, but you can also start it from the command line. And if you do that, you'll see the logging messages if you've got any logging in your Python scripts. If you don't need to see that, it'll still work. If you just start it normally, you just won't see the logging. So for me, so you can go to terminal, create a new terminal, and that can be, that one's a command prompt, or if you default, you can set the default to be PowerShell to start it. So let's try, we've tried command once already, let's go to PowerShell. So I want to run C:, program files, LibreOffice, program soffice.com, and you see it's throwing the ampersand in the front there, and I'll run it like that. So let's create a new spreadsheet, and we'll save this, and I'll just call that Meetup 087. And I'll see how I go for now, just with blank documents. Okay. All right, so the first task is create a script with that name, which was the name we downloaded, and we want to put in there a define a function which takes quantity and unit price, and actually I've got a mistake there in the task. It should have a third one, an optional parameter called quantity split, and just returns the value 20. So let's give that a go. We're defining a function. We'll call it pi brokerage. And it's going to take parameters quantity and unit price, and we're also going to give it a third optional parameter, which we're going to call quantity split. And it's optional, so let's give it a default value of none. Okay, so this function, we just want it to return the value 20 for now. So that's all we need to do. No, I can't really leave it on there. Okay, we'll create a LibreOffice Calc document in your Documents directory, and we'll create a worksheet on there called Trades, and we'll put in a few columns, and so let's see, C, D, E, F. Quantity and unit price are really the only two we're interested in at the moment. And then we'll create a macro. Okay, so let's go to our spreadsheet. We'll name our spreadsheet Trades. So this is really just setting up the data. So we've got 500 at $4.50, and then we're going to put in a function here to calculate the brokerage on a share sale of that quantity. So to do that, we have to create a basic function that's going to call our Python function. So it's quite easy to call basic functions from within LibreOffice, but to call Python, it's not so easy. So we call the basic function that then calls the Python function. So I'm going to go to Tools and Macros and Organize Macros, and we're going to go into the basic for now. Here's our spreadsheet. So in there we want to create a new module, and we'll call it Python Bridge. So there's a lot of steps here, so let me know if you miss any of them, because I can do them again. Okay, so this is where we can put in our basic code, and I've put in to that downloaded file a function that you can just copy and paste. So Control C to copy that, and it's in this one actually, and Control V to paste. So the name of this function is brokerage, and I just put BAS at the front so it's clear we're calling the basic version of it. It's got 3 parameters: quantity, unit price, and an optional quantity split. It creates a script provider called MyScript, and that in there you can see here it's got the name of the Python file. So I'm going to change that one to just meetup 087. And the name of the function PyBrokerage, which is correct. And you can see this is how Bash brokerage, how basic functions return the value. They say Bash brokerage is the value you want to return, and then end function. Okay, so Leo's trying to find where the scripts directory is. So it should be in here. So this tilde is your home directory. .config is a hidden folder, and in there are these other folders. Now this folder, this may not exist. You might have to make the entire path, which you can use with the make dir -p and all of that. So I'll just copy and paste that into Slack. And that'll make that directory for you. So this is our basic function. We've got that saved now. So I can close that. And we'll go back to our spreadsheet. And now that we've got the function there, we can call it, I call it as base brokerage. And we'll put in there a quantity and a unit price, and we will ignore the optional quantity split, and that'll calculate the brokerage. And you can see it's given us the number 20, which is what we expected because we've called the basic function. The basic function has called the Python function, and the Python function has just returned the value 20, and then that's what gets scored. So if you've got that far, congratulations, you've written your first Python script, your first Python macro in LibreOffice. So let me know how you went with that. So I can go over any of those steps. There's a lot to get everything into the right places. And so if you, it's hard to follow and know where this is. And the documentation is actually really poor for the Python. Like, it's a good sign that they're including Python now with the distributions, but it's a when you try to follow the documentation, it's really hard to know where to put things. Okay, so no comments. So I'm assuming everyone's got that working fine. So we've done task 2, task 3. Oh yes, so in LibreOffice we're using macros now. So we have to reduce the security level because they're our macros we've written ourselves, and so we do that in the tools options, or if you're on Mac, it's in the preferences. And in security, we adjust the macro security here to medium. I've already done that. And so we'll say, okay, so now every time you open this file, it will say, do you want to enable macros? And you have the choice then. And because you know it's ones that you've written, then it's okay. Yeah, so Leo's trying to catch up. Just put the Python file in that scripts folder, and just open the LibreOffice document that you've was provided, and that will have the basic brokerage function in place, and it will also have the and it will be talking directly to that Python script that you've downloaded. So you should be able to just go to a cell and type in equals Bash brokerage anywhere, and 2 numbers, and press enter, and it should give you, but for you it will actually give you a proper calculated brokerage, because I've put a full function in there, not just one that returns the value 20. Okay, so task 5 is now to fix up our pi brokerage function so that it gives us all the ranges of values. So it's up to $1,000 they charge $10, up to $10,000 they charge $19.95, up to $25,000 they charge $29.95, and so on. So I think we'll just concentrate on the LibreOffice side of things today. So I'll just copy and paste this function from here into my file that I'm creating from scratch. So that's all that's in the file at the moment. The other thing that I've done, so I've imported sys, and I'll import logging, and these things will show us how we can do logging in these functions, and it should turn up in the terminal. I'm running from the terminal within Visual Studio Code, but you could just run straight from command prompt or straight from PowerShell in Windows. Okay, so we'll save that function there. We'll go back to our spreadsheet and we'll select one of the cells and then press the F9 key to recalculate it. And we've got an error. And let's have a look at what the error is. Name logger is not defined. Yes. And that's, I didn't copy, the one line of code I didn't copy was where I made a mistake. So we've imported logging, that we create a logger. And we'll give it the name of the module that we're in. Okay. And we'll go back here and press F9 on that cell. That worked. And I didn't get any logging here, and that's because I've done logger debug. So we can just change that to logger warning. So just check it works. So as you see, it's calculating $19.95 now, and that now works. So it tells us brokerage is the name of the brokerage is just this name here. Sys.version is 3.7.7, so we can see that the Python that's come with LibreOffice is version 3.7.7. Even though I don't have that installed on my computer, all I've got installed is 3.9. So this is using the LibreOffice version. And the default logging level in Python is warning. So you'll see warning and errors, but you won't see debug. So I'm going to put that back to debug for now. So because every time we calculate brokerage, we don't want logging messages coming out. Okay, so in the in our basic file, we've got two things here. We've got the name of the file, the Python file. So that's meetup087.py, and so for you it'll be meetup087_tim_libreoffice.py. And you've also got the name of the function within that module that you'll be calling, and ours is called pi brokerage. So that'll be anything. Like I just put py at the beginning here so that I can distinguish when it's calling pi brokerage and when I'm calling bash brokerage, just to make it clear which one you're calling at any time. So if you, does that make it clear how you're linking to the correct ODS file. And it's using that by just pulling in, I'll just make this a bit smaller. So it's using language equals Python, so it knows to look in that scripts Python folder, and location equals user. That means it's looking in the user area rather than the system area for the system area for the Python file. Okay, so Peter doesn't have the basic, so to get to that, I can just close that window, and you're in here in your spreadsheet, and you go to the Tools menu, and there you've got macros, and in macros you can say organize macros or edit macros. So if you go to organize basic macros, click on Python bridge, and we've got Bass brokerage here, and then you can click edit to bring that up. Okay, so Dave's got Windows issues in the install. Okay, so if you could give us a bit more information, Dave, about what you've got working. Is LibreOffice running on your computer? Do you have the Tools menu in here with macros? And when you go to Organize Macros, do you get these 4 different languages? All right, well, I'll keep going while we're waiting for Dave to get back to me on that. So, not install, Windows update issues, stop Libre install. We'll just follow along. Okay, yes, I can't help you with that, sorry. I see the Python file but can't click OK. May have permissions issue. Okay, so when you go to the Tools menu and you go to Organize Macros, if you choose Python here, you'll see the Python files, but you can't click anything on them because the LibreOffice doesn't have any built-in functionality to work with the Python files, and that's why we're using Visual Studio Code to work with these Python files. So you can see this is the new one I've just created. It's only got the one function in it. You can run them from there, but you can't create, edit, rename, or delete. So your Leo's can't click OK. Okay, and where would the OK be? So it's yeah. So Leo, if you could just let us know which app you can't click OK in, and might be able to help. Okay, so now we're going to create another Python function called PyRevenue, which returns a positive value for the sale of shares. And so it's going to look at a column called buy sell, and if it's an S, that's going to be sell the shares, and a negative value for purchase. And we'll need to create a basic function revenue. We'll probably call that Bass revenue to call it. So I've got here the code for the basic function, so we'll just copy and paste that. Into our basic file. So we'll go into edit macros, and we'll put that in the same file. And this one's going to call, we'll go to this Python file, so you don't need to edit this, but I will because I'm working on a new file, and it's going to call the function PyRevenue. And the parameters of PyRevenue have to match these parameters. They don't have to have the same name, just really the same number of parameters, because they get passed through here in this array. So it calls my script, which is PyRevenue, and it invokes it by passing in this array, and then it has to also, this is just a quirk of LibreOffice, have these two empty arrays after it. Okay, so I'll save that. And let's copy and paste PyRevenue. So you can see these are fairly simple functions. This one's just looking at amount, less than $10, and it returns $10. Up to $10,000, it returns $19.95. And I've just put a quantity split divided by quantity. So in the case that we later on we'll be doing capital gains tax calculations, and so we might have bought a bunch of shares in one transaction and then sold it in two, and so we need to split the quantity between the two sales to work out how much of the cost happened in the purchase for that number of shares. And here in PyRevenue, if we're selling, then we're making money, so we get the quantity times the unit price less the brokerage, and if we're buying, then we're paying, so it's going to be a negative number of revenue, and so it's negative quantity times price, and we subtract the brokerage from that as well because we have to pay that. So fairly simple functions. And let's get some data. Now I'm going to grab some of the data that I gave in our sample spreadsheet. You see how here you get the enable macros option. Okay, so let's just grab some buys and sells. I'll paste them into there. That looks good. And I can calculate the revenue using whether we're buying or selling, the quantity, and the unit price. And there we go, and I can fill those down. So you can see we've got negative values when we're buying, positive values when we're selling, and these are the brokerages. Okay, so that's pretty similar to the first exercise, which was PyRevenue, so nothing new there. Let's go back onto our next task. All right, so there's a couple of extensions that you can grab. There's one called MRI, and that's from this URL here. So MRI will help to know all the different functions that you can call in Python macros. And because there's just a vast number of them and they're really poorly documented. So this does it by introspection on the code itself. Now on the LibreOffice website, they've got a link to a very old release of MRI that doesn't actually work in LibreOffice 7. So I suggest going directly to GitHub and Hanya and getting the latest version from that. This was released in 2018. So the file is an OXT file, keep that. Okay, now there's another file in GitLab that you should get. And I've put this on in the updated code, but it hasn't come through to their repository yet. Actually, I'll find it in here. If we look at, I'll go to GitHub. Session summaries. That'll do. I'll look in the pull requests. Oh, it's already is, and he's now done it. Okay, so it should be there when you've downloaded it. There's this one here, APSO, which is the alternative Python script organizer, and that's pretty useful as well. So I'll download that. And that one, he doesn't seem to put them in releases, he just has the file here in the main copy, so we'll grab that one and download it. Keep. Okay, so to install these extensions, we go back into LibreOffice, doesn't matter which one. We'll go Tools, Extension Manager, and it's a good idea to do the MRI one first. And agree to that. Let's add that one, and now we'll add APSO, the alternative Python script organizer. Okay, and restart LibreOffice. Enable macros. So what that can do, now we get in add-ons, we can run MRI, and we'll see soon what that'll teach us. And also in macros, we've now got this extra menu item, Organize Python Scripts. So if we look at that, we'll see our Python scripts, which are just functions at the moment. But one of the good things that you can do with this is embed in documents. So if you've written these Python scripts and you want them to always be associated with this spreadsheet file, you go to this menu tab here and then say embed in document, and that'll copy the file out of that your scripts directory and zip it up inside the file, and then whenever you move that file around, it'll have the scripts with it. But it's easier. It's easy for now to edit it outside of the file, and just when you've got it all complete, you can put it in. Although the this APSO also lets you edit from within the file as well. Okay, any questions so far? Right, so now we're going to do task 8, and this is moving away from just a custom function, which is what we've done first, and we're actually going to write oh yeah, where do you copy the extension? So I just downloaded the extensions into my downloads folder, and then I went into the tools menu of LibreOffice, and I was in LibreOffice Calc, but I think it's just any of them, and you've got Extension Manager. So from Extension Manager, you can add a new extension, and that just lets you choose where it is, and I just picked it up from my downloads folder. But once it's installed, it doesn't need to stay in the downloads folder, or even you can delete it. So do MRI first and then do APSO, because APSO it checks when it's installing if you've got MRI already installed, and then it gives you some integration with MRI. Okay, good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start writing functions. We're going to write scripts, macros that actually do things. So they'll be going to a cell, entering data into cells, selecting cells, and that sort of thing. They can even create new worksheets. All right, so I'll follow along with the script here to see, so I don't confuse you too much. So we're going to create a function. It's going to be called cells and ranges with one optional argument, and it's going to run a script that does this. Okay, so I'm going to copy that line of code and put it in here. So we're defining a function. It's going to be called cells and ranges. Now, it's depending on how we call this function, sometimes it needs 0 arguments and sometimes it needs 1 argument. So the way we let it be called in both times is to give it one optional argument. Now I'm going to call it event, because it is actually an event is what you'll get as a parameter when it's called in a particular way, but we'll just set it to none for the moment, and we don't actually need to know how it was called. All right, and this is the line of code that we're going to have, and this X script context, this is something that's available in the Python, the LibreOffice version of Python that we get when we run within LibreOffice. And from Xscript context, then we can get a reference to the document. From that, we can get a reference to the current controller. So, we could write this down in several. I'll write this in a couple of lines, so it makes more sense. And we'll say sheet equals active sheet, and that's just going to be from the controller. So the controller can tell us what the current active sheet is in our spreadsheet, in our workbook. So I've saved that sheet into a variable called sheet, and then I can refer to cell A6 by using the square brackets and then the string A6, and then I can set the value of the string in that cell to the words cells and ranges. Okay, so that's created a macro. You could just leave it as the one line that I had there to start with, but now if I want to run that macro, I can go to Tools, Macros, Run Macro, and that's stored in here, and there it is, cells and ranges. So let's run that, and there we go. In cell A6 we now have the text cells and ranges. So that's one way of running it, and that's a bit cumbersome when you're testing out your macros. You have to keep going through all those menu items to run the item, so the macro. So what we're going to do is create a push button, and every time we click on the push button, it will run the macro for us. So if we go to View Toolbars, we can pull up the Form Controls toolbar, and that's got one here. So it's got one here called Design Mode, and you'll see it's currently in Design Mode because that's in a blue. And then things that we can use, here's a push button. So I'll select push button, and we'll make a push button there. Now I can right click on this and set the properties on this control. So it's called a control because it's one of the controls that you put in a form. So the label, I might change the label so I know what I want it to do later. So let's call it, it's going to call cells and ranges, and by putting that label on it, it's now labeled cells and ranges. That makes it a bit easier for me. And then in events, we're going to choose something on the execute action. So when the button's clicked, it wants to execute something, and what we're going to execute is a macro. So we have to choose our macro, and now we can choose it straight from the Python file. So if you haven't created this Meetup 087, you can just use the supplied one, and we want it to run cells and ranges. Okay, so that's created the button. Now we turn Form Design Mode off so we can actually use it. So click that. Form Design Mode is now white. Grey background. Okay. And I'll delete that. And now I'll try running it by clicking Cells and Ranges, and it runs the macro and puts cells and ranges into the cell A6. All right, let me know if you had any problems getting that done. And this is one of the most useful things, is how to select cells and change the values that are in there. Now, I've done a bit of research to find all the different ways I could find of setting cells, and here's a whole bunch of them. So let's use cells and ranges that I've in the file that I gave you. So you can see it's using the active sheet. That's all the same as we had before. Right now we tried A7, we tried A6 before. Another way you can do that, you can do a row and a column. So that's row 5, and those rows and columns are 0 indexed. So row 5 in Python is actually row 6 in your spreadsheet. Okay, so what I've done, all these different ways of referring to the cells, I've set the string value of that cell with the way that I used to refer to it. So this one is saying sheet.getCellRange by name. So that's a function you can call on the sheet, and that and it takes a parameter as a string, and the string can be either a single cell or it can be a range of cells. So if you've got a range of cells, then you've got to select one of the cells within that range, and so you have to say call getCellByPosition on that range of cells, and that takes a column and then a row. So there's a bit of confusion here, so you have to know what functions take columns and rows and which ones takes rows and columns. But this one is a column and a row. And all these ones with parentheses are all columns and rows. So you can see I can call getCellByPosition on the whole sheet rather than just the range within the sheet. So let's run this one now. So I'll save it. You can see the dot up there says I haven't saved it yet. So I'll save it and click cells and ranges. And so now, and I'll make these all a bit bigger so we can see. So you can use a string here like this, or you can use the square brackets. So, and these are different programmers have provided this different functionality into the Python, into PyUno. And so that's why sometimes they use different conventions. But so really just try to choose the ones that work best for you, and then just stick with them. So I found I liked this one the best because the string values here relate exactly to the columns and rows that are here, rather than remember to subtract by 1 or add 1 each time. I then found that I could use a row and a column in square brackets to refer to a particular cell within a range. And so you pretty much just have to live with that. You can also, that's useful because it offsets it from the start of the range. You can also use A15 here. That will only work if A15 is actually in the range that was specified. There's a lot to take in with all of that stuff, so maybe don't worry too much if you're not understanding it. But when you actually come to start writing your own macros, you're going to go, oh, I really need a way of selecting a range, and this is the information I've got. Is one of these options going to help me to get there? One of the ways to find out what's useful is using that MRI add-on. So if I call up MRI, it will give us things like get cell range by name, and that will be in so let's see, get controller. So we have to get the document. Let's get it right. So this is all the stuff that's available in Xscript context, and we've got it by calling. I just called it straight. So let's go back to here, and Xscript context got a get document. Okay, just getting started, and this is the hardest bit. Okay, so sheets, we can use sheets, and within sheets we can find the element names. We've got one sheet that's called trades. So another thing you can do is you can get there by a selection. So if I select a particular cell and then do MRI on that selection, it'll work as though I've got a cell. Okay, so then from the cell I can find out what the absolute name is, and it's already told me here that the value is $trades.$A$6. So I know that I can always call this property from within my code to find the absolute name. And you can see in cell A16, that's what I did to get this value. I called absolute name property. So properties, to call properties, you just say dot and then the property name. If you want to call methods, then you call the name of the method, which is a function, and then you need to provide arguments, or if there are no arguments, you just provide an open and a close parentheses. I recommend just experimenting with that, and if you've got any questions, come back to me. Okay, so let's go back to the tasks. All right, so we've done MRI and we've done APSO, function, current controller. Oh yeah, so when you can go from the get documents, you can go straight to the sheets if you've got a sheet name, which in our case is trades. If you want to know things like what the which is selected, whether a cell's selected, whether a worksheet's selected, then you use current controller, and current controller can give you things like active sheets or worksheets or selections. And you'll see in my code there that there are bits where I grab the selection, I create a cursor, which allows me to do things like find the end of a range, which is a really useful thing when you're writing your scripts, because there'll be a bunch of data there, you don't know how many rows are there, and to find the end, you use the cursor to find the end. So I'll show you the example of cursor finding the end. So your cursor, we went to cell A10, so sheet.create cursor by range, starting from cell A10, and then I said go to end. So it's like finding the current region of a spreadsheet, which means it expands to a rectangle that's bounded by blank cells, and that way you can find the address of the end cell, and from that address you can work out how many rows are there, and by looking at the start row, the end row, start column, end column of the current region. I don't know if anyone's tried writing these macros before, but yeah, these are really useful functions when you are writing macros. Okay, task 9 we've done, creating a push button. That tells you how to do that. Task 10, we put some data into the trades table, and we want to do calc revenue simple, which puts in a formula for calculating brokerage and revenue on every row. Okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste that. So things to note out for here, I store the document into a doc variable, then I can get the sheet by referring directly to it rather than active sheet. I call it by its name, which is trades. You can also call it by its index, like it's the 0th sheet or the first sheet or the second sheet. I get a cursor from cell C1. I go to the end, and that'll tell me how many rows there are, and then I do a loop for each row in that range, going from row 1 to the row boundary, and I set the formula equals BAS brokerage, and then F semicolon G. Now this semicolon is really important. If you try using a comma there, you'll get weird errors. So even though you type in a comma when you're putting formula in yourself in a spreadsheet, when you want to do it by a macro, you have to put semicolons between the arguments. Okay. So row 1 is actually is the second row. This code doesn't look right to me. So what I would do, I think we'll run it and we'll see what's wrong with it. So I'm going to create a new push button. toolbar. Set the control properties. We're going to call a macro, and it's going to be calc the revenue simple, and we'll put the label calc revenue. Okay, I'm going to just dock that in there so it stays there. So if I click on doc revenue, I get an error. So this is what the errors look like. Can't multiply sequence by non-int of type string. Okay, and that's where I think I've got some problems in my code. So let's have a look at what the code has created. So in row 1, I've got calculate the brokerage on cells F1 and G1. Well, that should really be F2 and G2. So that's a mistake in the code. And the same error is going to be here. Yeah, that's using D1, F1, G1. So let's fix up the code. So let's go row 2 to row boundary. And I'm just going to use the string way of formatting, which is I'm going to use format strings. And we're going to store that in cell H and the next one in I. And you see how here I'm doing dot formula. I'm setting the formula property, not the string property. Up here we were setting the string property. So the 4 things you can set the string property, you can set the formula property, you can set the value property, and there's the 3 I can think of at the moment. So if you're doing a string, you set string. If you're doing a number, you do value. Okay, we fix that up and let's try calc revenue. That now works. F2, G2. We don't have any errors. D2, F2, G2. How are we going? I hope you guys are still following. So let's look at a more complicated thing that we could do with our calc revenue script. So I've done a more complicated one here. It uses named ranges rather than referring to cells by letters and numbers. And I've used a function to do that. So the function creates the named range and even sets the format that I want. So I can say on the sheet, create a named range called trade date in column C, go all the way up to row boundary, and then format everything in that column as a date format, and date's just a constant I've got up here, which is 75. So let's copy those into our script file. And I'll change the push button. So I'll go back into control design mode. Right click on the control and change the macro that it runs in events. And we want it to be the new one, which is calc revenue. Turn off form design mode and run it. Okay, so you can see I've now got formats D month, Y, I've formatted these as currency, so we've now got red values for negative and black values for positive. We've got, if you look at the formulae, so if we were using built-in functions in LibreOffice, we can refer to a named range like quantity or unit price, and it will just use the cells that are intersecting on the same row or the same column as the cell that's got the formula in it. For custom functions, that doesn't work. So the workaround to do it is to do something to convert these arrays, basically. So quantity is an array, and you can see that if I go to Sheet, Named Ranges and Expression, Manage, and you can see these are the named ranges that I've created in my macro. And quantity, it's got a bunch of cells there from F2 to F9, so that's 8 cells, but we only want 1. So to convert that array to a scalar value, which is a single value, not an array, we just multiply it by 1. And so it does that before it calls our custom function, and that has the effect of creating it a scalar value out of the array. And so only one of the quantities is used in that formula. And so that's why I've got all these 1 times everywhere. Now for strings, 1 times a string doesn't work, but you can use string concatenation, and I did that with an empty string and by cell. So by cell is that column there. These are just gotchas that are going to catch you out when you're trying to write macros. So I've just tried to demonstrate a few of them so that at least you'll have seen the problem before it hits you. So you decide yourself whether you prefer these named ranges, or even though they've got the 1 times in there, or whether you like using the column and row names that we did in our earlier example. Okay, so the reason you'd write a macro in a spreadsheet is when the spreadsheet's not doing something that you is just not well designed to do, and so you add the macro to do it. So one of the things I've found is when you're trying to calculate capital gains on shares that you've bought or sold, and you can put all your shares or sold in a nice table, but then you have to link up which purchases went with which sales, and that's a really manual process, and the spreadsheet really doesn't help you that much. So I've written a little script here that does all the linking of my buyers and sells and can calculate the capital gains. So this is really just a demonstration of what can be done. It's not that long of a script. So a lot of this is just cosmetic. And what it does, it creates a whole new spreadsheet, a whole new sheet within the workbook that has all the capital gains calculations in it. So it's called Calc Gains. So I'll save that in our spreadsheet. And we'll create another button for that. Gains. Okay. Tell me if I'm going too fast as well. And we'll just call it gains. Turn off the form design mode, and then we can run it. And we've got an error. Default ticked. Okay. So I didn't copy and paste enough code. So in this code, I've used default dict, which means it's a dictionary that if you call a key on a field that doesn't exist, then use this function here and to create that default value. And I'm using the list function, so it'll default to being an empty list. And that saves a lot of code checking if the dictionary already exists. But I have to import that from collections. So let's go and import this up here with our import statements. Default dict. Okay, so that's run. So it's grabbed all these buys and sells from our trades worksheet, and it's created a new worksheet down here, and it's put all the buys on the left and all the sells on the right, and then it's split them up so that the buys and sells have got equal quantities. So you'll notice CBA, we originally bought 100 of them, so it split that up into 70 bought on the 1st of January, and it works out the total brokerage was $19.95, but it's saying that brokerage just for these 70 would come to $13.97, so that gives me a buy value for all of that. And then it sold them on the 1st of February 2011, so the sell revenue was this amount, and so the capital gain was this. And so that's worked out all my capital gains for my sells, the sell trades, and I can look at that to see what the buy value was of all the shares that I've still got hold of. So just imagine what you would have to do that manually, and what the script is, how that's helping. Are there any questions on that? Let's go back through the tasks. Okay, create the macro which analyzes sells to buys, calculates that. Use a message box. Okay, so the final task I don't think I'll even bother doing. It's just using this message box function. So I've copied this code directly from this wiki, some useful functions, and that just shows you how you can throw up a message box similar to those debugging message boxes that have the error messages in them. So that's also another way of debugging code if you don't want to use logging. So I've put in here some references because the documentation's all over the place. In fact, we'll go look on the website because that's got, I've explained what it is. So on this file here, when you download it now, I've put all the references at the beginning. So this one here explains what the Xscript context is and how to use that. This guy has written a comprehensive manual on OpenOffice macros, which are the same as LibreOffice macros. That's all for BASIC, but the function names are pretty similar in BASIC as they are in Python. So it gives you a good idea of where to start with the function names, and you can also use MRI to help you find those right function names. This wiki here tells you how to manipulate cells and ranges in Python, so I used that a lot for the cells and ranges examples that I've done. This one here is quite a good tutorial on how to write macros. Everything in it I found in other places except the bit on showing how to use named ranges, which I found quite useful, so I thought I'd add this in. You could use it as a tutorial, but it also includes named ranges, which I could only find information about it in this one. How to use some of the cell references like sheet A1 or sheet row column. I found it just in this forum message. So some guy's written all this stuff and put it in there. It's actually a really good way of referring to cells, a quite succinct way of doing it, but it's not in any of the documentation except in this forum message. So if you want to read about that, you can look at there, but it's quite easy to use, so you don't even need to really go to that. OpenOffice have got some ways of manipulating sheets, cells and ranges using BASIC, and so yeah, you'd have to interpret them using Python to convert it to Python. So I think that's all I'm going to do now. Have you got any more questions? And really, I haven't spent much time talking about the Python issues here. Most of it has been just how to get LibreOffice set up, which is actually quite a difficult thing to do. Would you be interested in me doing another session on how to develop your macros? But it will assume that you've got LibreOffice all working in your environment, because I haven't got time to go over that again in another session. So if you've got any questions on that, if not, next week is the 1st of December, so that's the first Tuesday of the month, and we do a session for absolute beginners on the first session. So that's for people who've never seen Python before, and I'll be taking that session, and then the following 2 weeks after that will be taken by Arun, and he'll be dealing with machine learning. I hope you managed to get macros working on your computer. It's a real challenge, so don't feel bad if you had trouble getting it working. You can post questions that you've got on the Slack Beginners Python, and I can try to help you even during the week if you're trying to go through some of these exercises. Okay, thanks very much. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.